Hello and welcome. Today we would like to talk about further meditations on various subjects. So, we left off talking about what is the beautiful soul. Now, we want to continue here and pose a few questions. We've said that the beautiful soul works despite criticism and however, has to have self-knowledge. So, what do we mean with this? Essentially, when we want to work on something, even though other people may criticize it, the person with a beautiful soul will still continue working because they believe in it and because they put effort into their work. However, if the person is ignorant of themselves and oblivious to their own shortcomings and flaws and does not listen to criticism, then that leads to other problems. So we can say that that is not essentially something virtuous. And the person has to reflect on themselves and take criticism with dignity and respect. Now, to do that, to take criticism, transform it, and improve one's work, but still continuing the work, can be considered beautiful. So that is one thing about the beautiful soul. Then empathy is very important. We can say that empathy is a quality that signifies the beautiful soul. So someone who has the ability to put themselves into others. Now, this is an emotional quality mostly, but we can also say that the ability to put oneself into others is also an intelligent quality, and it is something that we can learn and we can strive towards becoming more. Now, there may be some limits depending on each person, but we can try to practice this and make it a default state of our existence, such that we can always try to project ourselves into others and figure out how they think and how they feel and how they are. So this projection has to do with empathy, and empathy has to do with the projection of ourselves into other beings. So that is not exclusive to humans, but also to animals. So for example, I've just heard just how horribly animals are treated in some parts of the world. And I would have to say that this reflects strongly on the intelligence, the virtues, the morals, the empathy, emotional intelligence of the people treating animals so horribly. Because they do not have the ability, the capacity to put themselves into the shoes of an animal. Now that is maybe a little bit of an ironic and maybe humorous metaphor, the shoes of an animal, but we all know what this means. To put oneself into an animal's position and try to empathize with that animal. Passion is also a very important point. So we can say that passion is that which drives us to do great things. For example, a writer who has the passion to write will achieve great deeds, achieve great works in their pursuit of writing. So we should train and try to have passion for things. Now that can be difficult, but what's easy or easier is to figure out where our passion lies. So it may not be that we have to force ourselves to be more passionate about something, although that is certainly something that we can try, and that would be very admirable if we can do that. However, that is maybe difficult for many people. What is not equally difficult may be that we can figure out where our passion lies. And we can pursue where we're passionate about with great virtue, with great ability, with a lot of effort, So a person may be beautiful when they figure out passion and they follow the passion. However, also when they try, again, the emphasis being on trying, on putting effort into something, to put passion into things that they may not be passionate about. So trying to discover passion and trying to understand why other people can be passionate about something. So I actually used to study about rocks at some point. And when I told my friend about this, I would talk for hours just about rocks. And my friend told me that it is incredible that someone can be so fascinated about rocks. And it is something that made me also think that, yes, we can be very fascinated about many things. We just have to figure out how to do this. And when we do it, it will be visible. People will recognize that we have a great passion for something. Even if at first it may not be something that they realize as being something interesting, but it will actually affect them. And they can get interested in, for example, rocks. Now, obviously, not to downplay geologists and everyone really fascinated with rocks, I think it is really fascinating. But to most people, that would be kind of counterintuitive to be so fascinated by, at first glance at least. So, figuring out where passion lies and trying to cultivate it would be, again, something that we may consider to be virtuous and beautiful. Again, the focus lies on trying, on putting effort into something. So if we put effort into trying to figure out how we can be passionate about something, that may be considered, or we can consider that can be considered beautiful. Now, as I said before, beauty is not something we're born with. I think when we look at someone or something and we say it is beautiful, it is more about how it aligns with the laws of the universe, the beauty of the universe, how much it is in accordance with the universe. However, what we do is that which we can be judged by. And so that are some questions about the beautiful soul and some ideas about what is a beautiful soul. Right? Now, next point. A philosophy for the people and the wise alike. So one of the things that I've thought about and keep thinking about is, what kind of philosophy would I want to present to people? You know, I would study a lot of philosophy from all kinds of philosophers, and I would develop my own philosophy, obviously. And I would think that philosophy should not be just for the elite, intellectual elite. Because people need to implement philosophy in their daily lives. They need to be able to do something with philosophy. So, just like mathematics shouldn't be all about complex theorems, but it should also be about simple arithmetics that people can use in their daily lives. Language shouldn't be all about high verses, poetic verses, but it should also be about simply using words in a constructive way, in a creative way, for everyday life, for people of all shapes and sizes. Similarly, philosophy should be something that everyone, literally everyone, can do something with. And now, okay, maybe there is a little bit of a difficulty or an issue, a limit, when it comes to very tiny children. because they do not yet have the same ability to wonder about the world in language that we would consider to be philosophy. But children of young ages already, they posit interesting philosophical questions. So they will ask not only about scientific facts, but they will ask about philosophical ideas and questions, and they will wonder about the world in a philosophical manner. So philosophy should be something that we can engage children in as much as we can engage prolific philosophers from high universities and from all parts of life, from all paths of life, sorry. It should not be something that is exclusive to just one part of a group or one group. Now, what is a philosophy for the people? A philosophy for the people would be something that everyone can study and apply in their lives immediately. So we can say that, for example, equality, questions about equality, questions about love, questions about happiness, they're all questions that are highly philosophical, and most of us will implement in daily life. We will act according to our philosophical ideas, our answers to these questions in everyday life. And the philosophy for the wise would mean that philosophy still needs to go deep into the questions. Philosophy still needs to be profound. So it would be not well developed if a question cannot be pursued extensively. So if we would have to say that very early on in questioning, we cannot further develop the logic of our idea or thought. So it does require us to develop thoughts systematically and structuredly and logically, such that we can say that we can have a discourse spanning books on a question and exchange with other philosophers, but at the same time it should still have a core that is translatable to all people, so that everyone can profit from this. Now that would be the idea of a philosophy for the people and wise alike. Next point. The poor who gives to charity. The poor who gives to charity is an idea of great sort of a virtue of giving, a virtue of love. It would be someone who, despite being poor, will still give more. Now, this is a metaphor that can be used for many other situations and things. For example, we can say that someone who is in a difficult situation, maybe a politically difficult situation, that they still try hard to help other people, even though they're at peril, they're in great, let's say, in danger maybe even. So that could be considered a virtue, a strength. Next point. Is only the absolute useful, or also that which is true partially? So there's a question where we can ask ourselves, do things have to be true absolutely? Do they have to be absolutely 100% true in all cases for us to make use of it? For example, let's think of an universal truth that we can always apply, such as mathematical theorems and their laws. Now, those may be absolute truths. They may be universal truths. And we apply them through many situations, in many instances, many applications. But the question is that the only useful truth? Is a truth that is only partially correct not also useful? That would be more of a pragmatic sort of outlook. It's an outlook where we say that, 9 out of 10 swans are white, one of them is black. Therefore, we still treat swans as if they're white, even though we know that it is not as 100% true. It is 90% true, not 100. So, even though the truth is not absolute, we still apply the rule. And I would believe that we do this more than with absolute truths. Also because absolute truths are much more difficult to find. So we may have developed historically and biologically and evolutionarily as beings that apply rules based on probability, not based on 100% truth. So we will make stereotypical judgments, and we will apply our reasoning based on the most likely outcome, not based on the absolute secure and sure and certain outcome. And we can ask ourselves if that is not also useful in philosophy, whether we may not also posit truths that are not 100% thought through and certain. Next point. What do we do with understanding? Teach, create, live a beautiful life. That's a very important question. So what do we do when we gain understanding? What does it bring us? What does it give us? So knowledge is relatively easy to obtain. We obtain facts about the world, including ourselves, and we store them. We transform them in ourselves later to achieve understanding of things. Now, what, however, is this useful for? For example, what do we do with knowledge? If I know that, let's say, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, then I can use this knowledge to heat up water and boil it. For whatever I may use boiled water. Whatever the use is, or the purpose, or the meaning, I can do that. But what about understanding? When we truly understand something, what is the difference between simply knowing and understanding? So if we understand, for example, Kant's categorical imperative, what do we do with that? Now, I'm not going to talk about this, but what do we do with the understanding of something? Is it the same as with knowledge, where we simply use things and apply laws and rules on top of them? Where we connect actions to knowledge? Or do we do something more with understanding? When we understand, what do we do with this? And so I've already pointed this out. Like, what would a person benefit from understanding anything? One thing is that we can teach it. We can teach things because we understand them. And that is different from simply knowing. Teaching knowledge is not really teaching. Teaching knowledge is exchange of information. So if I look at the sky and I say the sky is blue, I know, I don't understand. Why is the sky blue? That's a different question. And what really does it mean that the sky is blue? That's a different question. But the fact that the sky is blue is something that I can communicate, that I can share, that I can exchange with other people. I wouldn't call this teaching. I would call it simply talking. Now, teaching understanding or teaching a subject, I think, is a lot more than simply sharing information, sharing facts, sharing knowledge. So there we come to the heart or to the bigger question of what is teaching. We can also say that when we understand something, when we do understand, then we can create. Because let us say that we learn about chemistry and we learn about the facts of how ingredients get cooked, how water gets boiled and heated. Excuse me. That by itself does not make us a chef, does not make us a cook. When we understand the ingredients, then we can cook. Then we can prepare a meal. So when we understand, we can start to create things out of this understanding. And with understanding, we can live the beautiful life. Now, I don't mean beautiful as aesthetically pleasing. I mean beautiful as in good, as in ethically supreme, ethically great, ethically exceptional. So it means that through understanding, we can live life in a way that transforms our experiences and where we can make meaningful life decisions. Next point. Philosophy should never be for money. So that is a very short note, but I think it goes to show that it's crucial, it's meaningful, it's important that people engage in philosophy for the right reason. Now, there's nothing wrong with making money. However, philosophy in its definition, in its etymology at least, is about love for wisdom. It is not about love for money. So the pursuit should be about wisdom, not about money, not about fame, not about status. And if someone uses philosophy for the goal of obtaining money, then we have to ask ourselves whether the person truly loves wisdom, or if they use wisdom to obtain riches. Because if they use wisdom to obtain riches, they are not a philosopher. They are a thinker, practicing philosophy or thinking in the realm of the discipline of philosophy, but they're not practicing philosophy, they're not a philosopher. Now we can ask ourselves, well, would a philosopher ever be able to make money with philosophy? As a side product, yes, but not as the main goal. Because when the main goal is money, the main goal is not love. And only love is philosophy, love for wisdom. So people use this word philosophy to describe a discipline taught at universities, which I am against. I think it is a result of a tradition of philosophers, but it is not philosophy. Maybe we can think of an example here to create an analogy. However, without an example, let me try to explain it better. The philosopher is someone who loves wisdom, and philosophy is the practice of this. What it turns into is a set of disciplines that have common ideas and thoughts as an object, as their goal, and which consequently gets taught at universities. However, I would not call everyone who studies philosophy to be a philosopher, and I would not call everyone who does not engage in the traditional philosophical topics to not be a philosopher. Again, when the law for philosophy, or for wisdom rather, is not the primary, but money is, then we cannot really call it philosophy. We can call it the academic discipline of philosophy, but not philosophy. Next point. Strength are not always virtues. So for example, we may have the strength to be very capable at mathematics, but it is not a virtue. It is an ability, it is a qualification, but it does not mean that we are virtuous in mathematics, at least the way that I would use the word virtue. Next point. What are the questions that have no answer but will always be asked again? So, which questions are there that everyone will have different answers to, and that will come up again and again throughout history without conclusion? So where the teleology of answering a question in its sort of linguistic form is not applicable, because history will never have an answer for these questions. We can also ask ourselves if the answers are always subjective, or if they are beyond human understanding and comprehension. Because if they are just subjective, such as what do you want to do today? What do you want to do today can be a question that we can ask that has always as many answers, most likely unique answers, as there are people. It is not a scientific question. We can ask whether it is a philosophical question, but we can say that it pertains to ethics to some extent. But it is a question that has as many answers as there are people, individuals. However, there are questions such as what is being, which may not have an answer that can ever be fully answered, because it may extend and escape the limits of human imagination and language. Next point. We need to show ourselves to others so that we can get judged. It is very important that we present ourselves to the outside world, so that the outside world can give us feedback. For example, what I'm doing here. I'm thinking, I'm writing down these notes, and I'm reciting and talking about topics that are on my mind, and I give my thoughts, opinion, and I pose questions by which other people can judge me. Only through that can we get refined. Because without the judgment of others, we don't know which parts of us we should work on. Without others judging us, we don't know who we are. Seeking judgment, seeking feedback, seeking criticism is essential to figuring out who we are and improving ourselves. So it is useful for people to not only write down their thoughts in a diary, but to share them with others. It is useful for others because they learn something new. It is useful for the community because the community can get webbed together and grow and establish itself. And it is useful for the person who wrote the diary because they can reflect differently. They can reflect more about themselves and about their thoughts when they share them with others. Next point. It doesn't need a philosopher to be interested in virtues. I think that everyone can be and is interested in virtues. We don't need to be great philosophers. We don't need to be great minds in order to be interested in things, to pursue things, to study, to learn, to educate ourselves, and to practice the virtues, to become more of ourselves, to grow, to become better. Next point. A philosopher is not someone who thinks a specific way. And I want to say specific way, yes and no, because a philosopher does think in a specific way about topics. Like we have a way in which we process thoughts that may be somewhat characteristic of a philosopher. We apply logic, we apply various laws of logic, such as deduction. We apply linguistic means, and we apply introspection and meditation, depending on the person. However, what I mean is that there are lineages and schools of philosophy where people will write and think a similar way to one another so that they are accepted in the academy, in the academic scene, and in the environment of their culture. And I would speak against that. I think there's nothing as annoying to read and study as lineage philosophers. So people who come from a school of universities, or rather from universities and a school of thought, study under another philosopher, and try to copy that philosophy and the customs and standards that come with this school. Now, there are many benefits of that from this, such as the continuation of thoughts that have already been established, such as a similar language, a cohesive language that people will understand to be maybe easier to read when you already come from the same culture. So it will be easier to read another philosopher if you've already known the first one. It also leads to social cohesion, and it can have many other benefits. However, I deem it important that people figure out their own cultural identity and their own way of thinking and writing and speaking in order to become truly the philosopher that they are. without restrictions of what would this person think of us? What would this school think of us? What would society think of us? You do philosophy in a certain way. You do it like this. You cannot do it in a different way. Right? So it would be very detrimental to think in such ways. And sadly, most people seem to do that. They seem to think that, well, if you want to be a philosopher, you need to study at a very specific school. You need to write in a specific manner. You need to write, especially. Like, you cannot just talk about philosophy. You need to write books. And you need to communicate it in a very specific language. And you need to talk about specific topics that others have talked about as well. So philosophers who do that heavily restrict themselves in what their potential might be. So they may be able to express something that they refuse to express. Next point. To understand other points, we need to have the ability of empathy. So it may not be directly empathy, but in order to understand things, in order to understand someone else's position, point of view, in order to study something, we need to empathize into the other person to figure out how they must have thought, how they are thinking, how they think, in order to come to the conclusions that they came. Next point. Answers are useful to understand the question. So there's always this question, right? Like, what should philosophy do? Should it pose questions? Should it also answer these questions? And I would say that answers are useful if we want to understand the question. So, for example, what is beauty? If we want to think about beauty, if we want to understand this question, we can profit from having answers to it. Like, for example, beauty is effort in people. Beauty is accordance with the universe. Things like that. This way we understand the question better. We understand the question. Next point. When can we die? So that is a question that may be a little bit too extensive here, and that is quite existential as well in some sense. I would say that there is this question in us that asks, when are we allowed to die? Like, do we need to achieve something in our lives, right? So what is the goal of life? What is the meaning of life? When can we simply say that we've lived? And necessarily, this is a question that is way too extensive to answer here and to think a lot about. But to me, it is important to think about what is it that allows us to die? What is it that allows us to say that we can leave this world? Like, do we need to have certain things done in life? People have this thing called a bucket list, where they would write down what they want to have achieved and done in life before they pass away. Is that a prerequisite to being allowed to die? Right? I also heard about responsibilities being something that don't let us die. So long as we have responsibilities, we are not allowed to die, because we still have things that we need to do. We have people to take care of. We have work to be done. We have maybe a house that needs to be taken care of. Right? Next point. Systems and schools are the death of philosophy. Now, I don't want to be too harsh. I think systems and schools are very useful. But I want to point out that in order to truly love wisdom, in order to truly partake in wisdom, and to live wisdom, I do think that we need to get rid of systems of thought and get rid of schools of thought in order to liberate our philosophical potential and to truly philosophize in an infinite way without limits. So, next point. Power is illusion, it is only agreement on power. So that is something that we may already know beforehand. For instance, that if someone says that they're the king, are they the king? If others say that he is the king, is he the king? What is required for someone to be a king? And to be allowed to say, do this, and the other person does that. For example, if the king says that you have to give him money, you will actually do that voluntarily. Well, voluntarily is maybe an overstatement, but you will do that because of social conventions. And as such, power is an illusion, because the king is a person like everyone else, and it is only the social agreement that makes someone a king or not. So, as that, I would also say that power is not something worth striving for. As we cling to something and we tend to try to have something that is fundamentally not real. And that can also be taken on a whim by people when they decide that someone is no longer the king, for example. So power is a social construct that we may not have to want to pursue as part of our true happiness and something meaningful. Because it is founded on social agreement. And as such, does not necessarily say a lot about the person in power. It talks more about the current politics and society. Next point. Philosophy provides the best possible answer until science can provide answers. So that is something that we also see sometimes where people would say that, because science cannot yet answer it, it is philosophy, or it is a philosophical question. So for instance, we used to have the question of who created humans? And the answer now, through scientific methods and inquiry and experiments, is, well, it tends to be, or it shows, or it is actually the evolution of relatively random organisms that created humans. Therefore, it is no longer a philosophical question and we can stop thinking about it. Now, the question is, are there questions that can never be answered by science? I would say yes. Such as what is being, what is good. Now, some people will say that, you can look at science and you can say that, well, for instance, what is good can be determined based on looking at biology and social sciences and so on. I would completely disagree with that. First of all, you don't answer what is good, because good is an abstract concept. Good is something that is a metaphysical question. Good is something that maybe even exists on a different ontological layer, the form of good, the form of beauty. And so the other point is that the only thing that sciences can do is they can help us think about ethics, but they cannot explain ethics. So we have questions that are purely philosophical, that are pure philosophy, and that cannot be answered by science and never will be. And that is not an overstatement, it is simply an observation of the nature of questions. What type of question is it? Is it a question that can be answered or not? Another thing is that philosophy exists so long as you can disagree with it, without evidence. So for example, if we ask ourselves what is good, and you have one answer, and I have another answer, the fact that we disagree is enough for there to be a stalemate, and we cannot proceed much further. We can lay out arguments, but we cannot find evidence or proof for anything that will cement and really bring the point to an absolute, to one answer. In sciences, that tends to be a bit different. We can disagree, but we also need to figure out how to refute the evidence, or the argument, or the theory. Next point. What do friends do? Now, this is a question that actually baffles me, surprisingly. When I first thought of this, I really asked myself, like, yeah, what do friends do? What do we do together? Like, what is friendship? How do I know whether someone is a friend or simply a person that we spend time with? What is it that a friendship does? And it is not that obvious either. Like, for example, is it just about being happy together? I would say no. Is it something that brings happiness to everyone? Maybe. So friends focus on each other, that's one thing. But what is the difference between a friend and maybe a family member or a work colleague? So someone at work that we hang out with or spend time together with? What is it that makes a friendship? And what do we do as friends? Like, do we simply hang out, play games, go watch movies, talk together, cook something together, go to parties? What do we do as friends? What is it that friends do? This is a question that is still somewhat baffling to me. Now, next point. So, there is an idea that the philosopher should focus on two things. One is on philosophy itself, and the other on his friends or her friends. Now, philosophy itself means that we engage in questions, in thought, in meditation. We process these, we develop these, we formulate them, and we share them with as many people as possible. We discuss them with people. We seek criticism. We seek feedback. We seek inspiration. But on the other side, the philosopher should tend to their friends, and they should share the work that they're doing in philosophy with their friends. So that might be the best or the worst friend, depending on where you lie and what you think. So that friend would be someone who constantly keeps asking you questions, who is constantly dissatisfied with something, who would constantly bring up difficult points, difficult arguments, and would challenge you to think, would challenge you to become a better person. And this can be a very annoying type of friend. A friend who, like someone who constantly pushes you to grow, can be somewhat bothersome, can be frustrating, can be difficult. But they do it because they love you, because they want to see you become a better person, more of who you are. They know that you can be more than you already are. They know that you can grow. Now, next point. Philosophy brings the outside and inner world into harmony. So, that is something that came to my mind when I was reading on some other philosophers. There was this idea that we only ever learn about the outside world but not the inside world, and that through philosophy we can create a balance, a harmony, and sort of the opposite of a dissonance. Maybe harmony between the inside and outside world. Because the accumulation of information does not really say a lot about us on the inside. We can also learn in factual ways about the inside, about ourselves. But the difference to actually being a developed person, a developed self, a developed personality is different. We need to have philosophical questions to bring all of these problems together, to bring all of these facts together. Because it matters little when we know how the world works if we don't know what to do with it. That is partially ethics. So if I understand that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, it still doesn't tell me whether I should boil it or not. It tells me how I can boil it. That is the skill. It is not science, it is the skill derived from science. So it is a craft or some sort of skill like cutting people's hair, farming, and so on and so forth, writing, sculpting, music. It's a skill derived from science, but we still don't know whether we should do that and how we should do that. So given multiple ways of doing the same thing, given multiple manners of cooking food, which one should we do? We need to decide which one we should adopt, which one we should pursue, which one we should use. And that is a philosophical question. So in everyday life, we are faced with myriads, with thousands of philosophical problems. What should I do? Should I do it? And sometimes also, how should I do it? Right? So, therefore, science is incredibly useless at answering the meaningful questions of life, in life. Science I see usually a little bit as providing the ingredients for a meal. With only the ingredients, you can eat the carrot raw, unpeeled, unfinished, like that. Yeah, and you can eat a little bit of an egg with its shell. You can eat a little bit of a spice, of spices. You can eat a little bit of milk or drink. You can eat a little bit of pepper or chili. But that will not be a very satisfying meal. That will not be a healthy meal at all. What you need to do is you need to figure out how to cook that stuff. How to put all of that together in a way that creates a delicious, wonderful, and healthy meal. That is philosophy. Science alone is simply gathering ingredients. But then you need to know what you do with those ingredients. And that is philosophy. So in everyday life, we are faced with the questions of what we should do and how we should do that. Now the how, we can say, is more like the craft, the skill, the art. However, the what we should do is an ethical question. It's a question of what is the good thing and what is the bad thing. What thing is good to pursue, and therefore this is what we want, and what thing is bad, and therefore this is what we don't do. So again, if given the question or the problem of whether I should sit down and record a podcast episode, I have an ethical question to answer. I have to answer to myself whether producing a podcast episode is good or not, and whether not doing it is good or bad. So that's about what we do. So we can say that philosophy is necessary, is very absolutely necessary to bring the inside and outer world into harmony. To figure out what all of this actually means. Because science doesn't tell us what something means, it only tells us how something is. But it doesn't tell us what it means. Next point. It is not about good and evil, but about beautiful and meaningful decisions. So it's not about correct decisions. So for example, when we talk about good decisions, it is not about something judgmental, judging, where we say that you're an evil person if you make this decision. It is about, or this is right or wrong. This is factually correct or incorrect. This is in accordance with authority or not. It is more about figuring out what is beautiful and meaningful in our decisions. Right? Next point. How do I attain peace of mind? Now that is way too large of a question to even start or pause it here. But it is one of the most important questions. How do we attain peace of mind? What is it that helps us have peace of mind? Next point. Christmas. So, here I have a topic that I find quite interesting. Christmas. Christmas tells us a lot about culture, about society, about individuals. Why? Because it is one of the most widely practiced holiday in the world. And most consistently practiced because it is every year. So we have one entire year of time, 364 days usually, to figure out how we should behave, what we should do, what Christmas means to us. And what ends up happening a lot in the Western world today is that people celebrate Christmas very scattered from each other. So instead of being this festival where everyone comes together and they share with each other, they strengthen the community, the bonds, the ties, and families come together, you know, the more or less original type of idea at least, it turned into something where maybe two people hang out together, they spend Christmas together, two other people spend Christmas together somewhere else, maybe three people spend it somewhere else. And nobody talks with each other. And that is quite saddening. That is something that makes me think. Because there we can really figure out what are the problems of our society. If Christmas is a festival that is celebrated through this nuclei family just sticking by themselves, as if that's not what they do 364 days a year already anyways, then we can ask ourselves, do we even want to spend time together? Right? So, is it even important to us to have a family or a community? Because we could say that fundamentally it is not even just about family, but it's about community. You know, the entire village would come together to practice Christmas. Just like pretty much every other holiday, where people come together as a tribe, as a village, as a city, whatever it is. However, people come together. And so long as we have these tiny nuclear families practicing it by themselves, we can really see that society has a huge problem. Right? There is absolutely zero social cohesion. There is nothing that holds people together. Society has no binding material, no binding adhesive, no binding thing. Next point. The housewife or house husband as the most important job. I do think that it is very difficult to say what is the most important job, because it presupposes that jobs can be more or less important. Still so, I would say that for any society, if you do not have someone to take care of children, to raise children, you do not have a society. It's impossible. It's biologically impossible. It's mathematically impossible. There would be no growth. People would have been extinct. They would be eradicated. They would not survive. So someone has to take care of children. And it is baffling that for at least these days, we see so many people saying the thing of, hey, what do you work? Oh, you know, I'm a housewife, I'm a house husband. Instead of saying, hey, I'm a housewife, I'm a house husband. This is great work. And people then shrug and say, or just go, oh. As if saying, yeah, that's not a job. We want to know what your job is, so you're basically unemployed. Which is absolutely bizarre to me. That the probably most important job is the least recognized. Right? It's still better to be working in a mine or a factory than to be working for the family. The most important part and organ of society. We can then ask ourselves, what are the other most important jobs? We can say, well, it needs people who provide food. So farmers, very, very important. Coincidentally or not, same problem here. Farmers are not a very prestigious job. Like people who work as farmers in the agriculture sector, they're not seen with a lot of respect, even though they provide one of the most important professions and jobs, which is again very bizarre and offensive to some extent. And then it depends a little bit how we would look at things, but in my opinion, I would pose the argument that philosophers are one of the other highly important jobs and professions and careers, because a philosopher transforms our minds. A philosopher is the person who deals with the mind. So once we have taken care of the body through someone who works at the home and someone who provides food, the next thing we need to do is take care of our minds. And that's a philosopher. We can also say a psychologist and a teacher. But a philosopher is certainly up there. Certainly one of those big, important jobs. And similarly, there is the tendency that philosophy is not something that pays too well, except for some positions at academies or universities. And it's not something that people really go, wow, you're a philosopher. People go, what? You're a philosopher? So, again, we seem to value very weird professions for very weird reasons. No wonder that people don't want to be housewives and house husbands. However, again, as I would claim, probably the most important job. Next point. Free choice is ethically significant. If we cannot make a decision based on free choice, the question is whether that is an ethically interesting choice, whether we can judge a person for that. So for example, if someone says, or if someone does their homework because they decide that they should do their homework, we can say they do a pretty good job, they do a great thing, they work hard. Now, whether or not I agree with homework is a completely different question, but that's an example. If, however, someone forces another person on threat of death, capital punishment or something like that, something like this, that they need to do the homework or they're dead, they die, then we cannot really say that the person still doing their homework would then be greatly admired or greatly judged or greatly perceived. Next point. What is fame? So, one of the most baffling things that I've always had to think about was, and that came from an early age already, sorry, this desire of people, especially young people, to want to be famous and wealthy, to have power. So I dismantle these concepts, these ideas, to figure out what is it and is it useful? Why is it useful? Why is it not useful? One of the things that I find with fame is that it is not simply that, but it is at least to be known. What good does it do to be known? Right? it seems to speak to our egoistic desire to be a bigger player in the political landscape, in the political field, in society. Because as we've said before, power is that which people agree on. And if we are part of this web of society where more people think of something, we exist a little bit more. We exist because 100 people know us instead of just 10 people or one person. So we want to be known, to exist more. And to exist after death, for example, after we're gone. But is that really useful? I would say probably not. We can argue that it greatly satisfies us, primitive instincts of survival. We can argue that the posthumous, the after-death knowledge or knowing may be useful or maybe something that we can further investigate. But simply being known by many people is arguably very useless. And in fact, it brings about huge problems, enormous amounts of problems. For example, you have more responsibility, because everything you say can mobilize a mob. And we see this all the time. For example, people on YouTube. If you have a large YouTube channel and you speak out against another YouTuber, you will sometimes see lots of people flocking and gravitating over to that other YouTube channel and harassing them. So you have a lot more responsibility. And people say, oh no, I'm not responsible for what I say or how people understand it. I should still be able to speak freely. No. The more people know you, the more people listen to you, the more responsibility you have, whether you want it or not. And that's one of the curses about fame, that you cannot get rid of being known. You cannot say that today I don't need to watch my tongue, today I don't need to watch what I say, because there is the fact that many people will listen. And while you cannot be fully held responsible for how people perceive it, you can be held responsible for how you put it. And you can be at least causally linked to bad things happening, even if it's a misunderstanding. But if someone misunderstands your point in a way that makes them do horrible things, there's at least a causal relationship which we don't want. So there's still a question, can we be held responsible and are we to be blamed? That is a different question, but at least we're connected to that, we're linked to that, and that can be bad for us. So responsibility is one thing that is very high up there when we are known by others. Another point is when we are known by many people, we also so sorry for the lapse in memory there. When we are known by many people, another thing that occurs is that people will draw attention to themselves from people who may be jealous, envious of the fame. And that brings about their own kind of problems. So fame is something that I would say is actually a curse. You do not want to be famous. You want to not be famous. Absolutely not. But people still perceive fame as being something they really desire. And then there's another question, like fame by itself. What does it really do for us? Not much. It only means that other people know us. Power is maybe that which people desire. The ability to influence other people, many people. But there's the question again, what does it bring us? What does it do for us? What does it give us? Probably also not that much. And we can say that others knowing us, being famous, having fame, can be useful if we can help people more through that. So for example, a teacher, if someone can teach to many people, that may be better than teaching to only a few people. Right? So fame may be one of those things that many people think they desire or want, but probably when we really think about it, not the best idea. So, next point. Are we our history or the moment or the future? So that is a question of personal identity. We ask this question to figure out what are we really. And the discourse on personal identity is really vast. So I cannot really go into everything here, needless to say. But I still want to posit at least, are we our history or are we our moment or the future maybe? I don't think that our history best describes us. I think that our history misses the point what we are today. So you can think of that as seeing the outside of yourself without seeing the inside. So the history excludes the present. That's the point of history. There's a specific time where history stops. That is in the present, or before the present actually. So it would be reasonable to say that what are we is right now, right? If we measure a particle in space and time, we also need to measure it in time. We need to say, what is it now? 5 seconds later, it might already be different. Then we need to measure it again and say, what is it now? In order to figure out what it is. So everything matters in the moment, in the now, arguably. So thus, we can say that what we are is what is in the present. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. What we are tomorrow, maybe. What we are yesterday, maybe. But what we are today, right now, is what we communicate with people and what they can know about us. So there's the question of whether our history is part of this moment, right? And with that, I would like to conclude for now, and I wish you a great day.